I'm really glad to have you here to chat, and I've been following your account and the things that you post. And for me, I have to admit, with some level of shame, I suppose, that I didn't really know very much about what was going on in Afghanistan. I probably didn't care that much until the withdrawal of the US from Afghanistan. And to me, for some reason, it just emotionally hit me. It really resonated. And in particular, it did because, I was seeing people who had this like freedom to be who they are. And suddenly that gets taken away. And that gets, the idea, it's one thing to sort of live in a regime that is already oppressive and that's all you've ever known. And it's something else to have a very different culture and have that ripped away from you. And I think that was something that had an emotional resonance with me, and I started caring. And of course, all these visuals of the planes taking off, obviously that also had some impact. But I think for me, it was that idea of like having freedom and then losing that freedom and the unbelievable experience that must be, the painful experience it must be. So, I've been following your account for a little bit on X, and just seeing some of the stories told that I don't think are being told that much. And so I know you worked with the Wall Street Journal in Afghanistan. Can you tell me a little bit about that experience, the work that you did back when you were there on the ground?
Thank you, Catherine, for making the time for this conversation. I appreciate it. I know a lot is going on in the world, and people are keep forgetting about the disaster we have in Afghanistan, and it's thanks to supporters, Afghan people in Afghan women in particular, like you, who keep this Afghanistan and the news and the media. As you mentioned, the that you watched the footage of the planes from the airport during the collapse. That day was a huge trauma, and I think our generation, my generation, especially people who lived through it, I was in
Mhm.
the middle of all that for 3 days at the airport. So I saw that all that with my own eyes, and it was unbelievable. Like it was like really and truly like a nightmare. And I think it's a trauma that we will never recover from, especially my generation, people who grew up in relatively peaceful and relatively democratic Afghanistan with relative uh, rights. It was such a huge trauma for us. And I've been working in Afghanistan since well, when the Americans came to Afghanistan, I was just a kid. So I grew up. I went to school. I grew up. I worked. I studied, all under the US-backed government in Afghanistan, through under which we had relative security, especially in the urban centers. And people had the right to vote, people had the right to talk. Obviously, there were a lot of problems. There was corruption, there was insecurity, there was uh, a lot of other issues, poverty and economic hardship. But we were on the right path, on a very slow pace, but we were moving towards something that we all dreamed of. And just one day waking up and you lose everything. So it's such a huge trauma. I did work for the Wall Street Journal. Before the Wall Street Journal, I started as a journalist, as a reporter, working for a local English newspaper in Kabul, Afghanistan Times, or Afghanistan Times. And
Mhm.
then after that, I joined the Wall Street Journal. So I worked for the Wall Street Journal for 8 years, and through those years, I extensively traveled throughout Afghanistan to all the rural areas, to the provinces, to different cities, and I reported mainly, obviously, on the war, on the conflict, but also on the human cost of the conflict too, on the civilian casualties, and I was also one of the very few journalists who saw all sides of the conflict. What I meant is I embedded with the Afghan Special Forces, with the Afghan commandos, with the American Special Forces, the American military, and also the Taliban. So I was
Wow.
one of the very few journalists who went on an embed with the Taliban and stayed with them and saw their side of the war too. And then in 2020, I established an NGO, Afghan Peace Watch, with a group of other Afghan journalists and researcher. And initially, what we did was we right after the Doha deal in Qatar between the Taliban and the United States, there was this agreement between the Taliban and the United States that the Taliban would do, instead of a ceasefire, they would do reduction in violence. So our first project was to keep monitoring the situation in Afghanistan and see if there was truly reduction in violence. But we saw there was no reduction in violence. The Taliban agreed to that they will not carry out attacks in urban centers. They will not do did not conduct major attacks like car bombings and things like that, complex attacks. But they did. They violated all those terms. So initially, we kept track of all these security incidents across Afghanistan, as well as the casualties on all sides, not only on the civilian side, but on the government side and also the Taliban side, as a cost of war, documenting it from all sides, how many people, the people and the frequency of attacks and the casualties. We used to document all that. And then uh, after the collapse in August 2021, I had to move my whole team outside of Afghanistan, and myself had to move from Afghanistan, and then. But we still kept the work going in Afghanistan, and we still do it. Recently, I did a couple project. One on Islamic State, the evolution of Islamic State in Eastern Afghanistan through the NGO we have, as I mentioned before, Afghan Peace Watch, and another report was on the illicit weapons smuggling and the weapons dynamics under the Taliban in Afghanistan. So we were looking into what happened to the weapons that were left behind by the United States, and who has access to those weapons, and what are the prices.
Because you mentioned that you were trying to track down the weapons, and it's like a lot of, good question is, why did the U.S. government leave those weapons behind? Was that part of a deal or what?
No, the United States, they didn't leave the weapons to Taliban in that sense. But what happened was that throughout the 2 decades, the United States, they spent $80 billion arming the Afghan armed forces, right? So after the collapse of the previous government, the Taliban took control of most of those weapons. So now it's uh,
Holy, wow, there's an earthquake. Um, so before the earthquake, so so essentially they didn't leave. So the Americans were giving the weapons to a particular group.
to the former
Mm-hmm.
government, to the former Islamic Republic of Afghanistan, which was the US-backed government in Afghanistan. And the Afghan, they're called NDSAP, Afghan National Defense and Security Forces. So before the collapse, on paper, Afghanistan had 3,500,000 people in the security forces, and they were all armed mostly with the US weapons. And the assault rifles, M4, and apart from that, they've had MRAPs, Humvees, and all these different vehicles, and as well as some other like night vision goggles and like other equipment and gears. So the Taliban are now in control of all of those weaponry and all of those equipment. Now it's worth that the weapons they're holding on to, the Taliban, it's worth around $8 billion. So it's quite a lot of
Wow.
money spent. And
It's a lot.
imagine these Taliban, in the 90s when they were in power, they barely had a bicycle. Like they could barely afford Toyota uh, pickup trucks, right? In the
Hmm.
90s. And now they have all these luxury and like these very high maintenance and like American weapons. The vehicles and the weapons and the assault rifles and the ammo, and they have a lot of it, like huge quantity. And there also it's going to the hands of other armed groups in the region too. So the Pakistani Taliban, they have access to these equipment, and as well as the the Islamic State, Khorasan province, and other groups, even some groups in Iran, and some groups even in Kashmir. They have access
Wow.
to because these weapons have made their way to the black market. So you can literally go to places in Afghanistan right now. There are certain weapon markets that you can go. You can buy any American weapon, even drones. You can buy. So they've made it very easy. So you go to in certain parts though. You go to a market, a black market. You can buy a drone. You can buy night vision goggles, and you can buy anything. And obviously, in some of those markets, you can buy drugs too, like large
Hmm.
quantity drugs. And
What do you think the America could have done differently in the case of their withdrawal? Because obviously now we've got a situation with the Taliban has all these weapons, and on top of it, all these people being left behind and really betrayed in some way, or were betrayed. Um, how could it have, given that the U.S. wanted to leave Afghanistan at some point, and what could they have done differently? And did they even have, morally, did they have the imperative to stay?
I think I'm a strong critique of the chaotic withdrawal by the Biden administration, even though the deal was originally made by Trump. Uh, what they could have done different was that when we criticize the withdrawal from Afghanistan the way the Americans, Biden administration did, it's not because I or people like me advocate for the U.S. military presence in Afghanistan.
Mm-hmm.
Afghanistan could have been saved without U.S. military presence, without boots on the ground. There were a lot of ways to keep the Taliban at bay. There were a lot of ways without the US presence, without the US military boots on the ground. To start with, they should have included the Afghan government and Afghan civil society and the Afghan other stakeholders other than the Taliban and the peace negotiation that the Americans when they signed the agreement with the Taliban in Qatar, Doha, in 2020, Afghan government or Afghan people were not part to it. There were two parties, the United States and the Taliban. So to start with, the deal was the negotiation. It completely sidelined the Afghan people and as well as the Afghan government, which was I don't say that the Afghan government was really the true representative of the people. But the president, which I dislike so much right now, he had, and the government had some sort of legitimacy because people, millions of people voted. There were elections held in Afghanistan. So the will of those people, the fate of those people, it was all thrown at the Taliban hands. So the way the Americans withdrew from Afghanistan, the way they stopped, during the war with the Taliban, the superiority the Afghan government forces have had over the Taliban was the air support and the air force, right? And the air forces of Afghanistan was entirely, almost entirely controlled and maintained by contractors, by US contractors. And in the Afghan Air Force's fleet, there were not a lot of aircraft, advanced aircraft, but there were some like attack helicopter. There were like Super Tucano fixed wings, and there were some Russian helicopters and some like Apache and Black Hawk helicopters. But it was entirely dependent on the U.S. for airstrikes, and as well as the maintenance. So what the United States did, what the U.S. military did after the Doha deal between the Taliban and the United States, they stopped giving the Afghan government forces air support. And they took all the contractors, there were 12,000 or 16,000, between 12,000 to 14,000 US contractors that were taking care of the fleet, the Air Force fleet. They withdrew everybody out too. So literally, the Afghan security forces who were fighting with the Taliban, and they were heavily relied on air support for logistic and also for medevac and for a lot of other things. So they completely stopped supporting Afghan air forces in supporting the Afghan forces and the ground fighting the Taliban. So the Air Force was practically disabled. And the Afghan forces, they lost that superiority that they've had against the Taliban, which was their support. Apart from that, the Taliban had the same kind of weapons they had. So, and also the moral, they were demoralized. Because what the Taliban would do, they would go after the Doha deal, they would go to all these different army bases and government bases, and they'll tell police and soldiers that hey, see this, we have made a deal with the Americans. They are going to hand Afghanistan over to us. Why you're fighting us? If you surrender, we'll give you some money, we'll give you some clothes, you can go home and be with your kids. Otherwise, you are going to lose this war because the Americans are not on your side anymore. So that, and they started this whole campaign as part of their psychological warfare, and that's how it all led to the collapse. So there are a few narratives that have been fabricated, especially in American media, that Afghans didn't fight. It's such a big lie because 60,000 Afghan members of the security forces, they died fighting the Taliban. Among them, my cousins and some of my friends, and they died fighting the Taliban. So they did fight.
Yeah.
And they did not just surrender to the Taliban, but when, in most cases, they were there when the air support was cut off, and in some places they ran out of ammunitions. So they had no other option but to lay their weapons, as well as the leaders, the Afghan leaders, they, especially the president we've had at the time of the collapse, he turned out to be the biggest coward and a traitor too, because he made a huge announcement just days before the collapse that we're not going to leave Afghanistan. He actually, so there's this one similar situation happened in 1920s, so like 100 years ago. We had a king who was a progressive king. His name was Amanullah Khan, and he started implementing some reforms in Afghanistan, and then there was a revolution of conservative people against him. And he, at that time, he fled to Italy, to Rome. So back then, during the collapse, the president we've had, he specifically, I remember, and I tweeted that quite like a couple times, the same video clip, that he's making fun of that king, that I'm not Amanullah Khan, I'm not going to flee, I'm going to stay with my people. And days after, he was gone. The way he deceived the entire nation, he left everybody at the mercy of the Taliban. So it was a result of like not one bad decision, up and not by one bad person. It was a result of many bad decisions by many bad leaders and people that led to that chaotic withdrawal of Afghanistan and the collapse of Afghanistan. I wholeheartedly believe Taliban could not have taken control of Afghanistan in a million years. With that, the
Mm-hmm.
Doha deal, and people were ready to fight. Nobody's. The Taliban are trying to change this narrative, making people think that, well, Afghans, they love Islam, they want Sharia. No, they don't want Sharia. They're running away from Sharia. There are 8 million people that have left Afghanistan since the Taliban came back to power. If Afghans loved Sharia law, if Afghans loved the Islam, the Taliban's Islam or Islam in general, why would they leave the country? Why would they be? Because now we have the purest version of Islam in Afghanistan. So why are people leaving right now? Because they don't want Sharia. They don't want Islam. It's a fake narrative. Prior to the collapse, there were several surveys by, I remember, from the Asia Foundation, and there were a couple other organizations who did surveys on polls and the Taliban support in Afghanistan, and their support was less than 10% people were supporting the Taliban. So the
Wow.
Taliban did not have the kind of local support that they now are
Claim.
uh, claiming, and they never, especially in the urban centers, they never had that kind of support. People of the because Afghanistan changed a lot. Like in the past, the 2 decades under the U.S. invasion in Afghanistan, a lot of things changed and changed for the good. So we had a lot more infrastructure. There were a lot more women in the offices. Obviously, our society is misogynist. There is no doubt about it. So we have a misogynist society, but relatively, women could go to school. I went to the American University of Afghanistan, and we had like there were more girls than guys in our school, and as well as in the media, there were like a lot of women working in the media sector, and people could vote. Like where there was uh, a lot of things going on, a lot of mess in the election too, but people could vote, they could choose, and there was like relatively free media, and the urban centers, they were booming. What happened was, I tell this to my friends most of the time, that if that relative stability that we have had in Afghanistan, if we could have kept that status quo for one more decade, the whole Afghanistan would have changed. Because when the Americans came to Afghanistan, I was just a kid. So my generation, we grew up under the US occupation in Afghanistan. So we got familiar with a lot of things. But we learned a lot of people from my generation. They learned how to speak English, how to write in English, and they went to some of them, not all of them, when took scholarship, got scholarship outside the country. They went to schools, good schools in Afghanistan. And when the Americans first came, post 2001, along with the Canadians and the British and the all NATO members,
Mm.
there was no capacity in Afghanistan. The entire Afghan economy, entire Afghan society, it was run by aid money. So we didn't really have the human capital, our skilled labor, our people to run the country. And after 20 years, 50, not 20 years, after 15, 16 years of the US occupation, Afghanistan just started. People from my generation who grew up in relative stability in Afghanistan, they started to contribute back to the country. So especially after 2016-17, in Kabul and other cities of Afghanistan, there were so many small SMEs started popping up. So a lot of brands, a lot of coffee shops, a lot of cafes, a lot of restaurants, a lot of shopping malls, a lot of small businesses, SME, small and medium businesses, and almost all my friends, all my people I went to school with, and people I meet, they all run some sort of business. For instance, one of my friends had a clothing brand he just started just 2 years before the collapse. Another friend of mine, he created the a local delivery business like Uber, but it was an Afghan delivery
Yeah.
system. I had my own two restaurants. So I created the first steakhouse in Kabul, and I also had a Mexican restaurant in Kabul. And then this generation that they grew up with, and they got exposed to the to they travel, and they got exposed to how the world work, and
Well, it
they
sounds like
started
they had
contributing.
ambition. They had
Yeah,
ambition, entrepreneurship, which are really great drivers for economy, but also culture. So that made a lot of sense. You mentioned also that you were embedded with the Taliban. I'm curious, was there anything about the Taliban that sort of surprised you that was different from your expectations and how they were thinking, perhaps?
obviously. So the Taliban are uh, they're a complex group, the Taliban. So there are some people within the Taliban who fight because of money. There are people who are ideologically Taliban. They are
Mm-hmm.
ideologically they're jihadists. They believe in jihad.
So it's a religious, when you say ideologically, it's their
Yeah, it's a
religious
religious.
belief.
Yeah, it's religious
Mm-hmm.
belief. And then there are people who are just there to make money. They're just criminals, they just want to make money there, and
What's the
they were trying.
proportion of that?
So they obviously the majority of the Taliban, they're they're religious fanatics who want to
Mm-hmm.
do jihad and kill infidels. But there are like significant number of people who are with the Taliban because of grievances from the former governments, right? So there are some people with the Taliban because, especially in the south from Afghanistan, they're with the Taliban because they make a lot of money from narcotics, and the Taliban, they're partner with the Taliban. So the group I was embedded with, those people, they were very religious Taliban. So they were ideologically, they did believe in what they were doing. And the way they fought, I was surprised because they were so much committed to this fight. Like they would attack American convoys 3 times every day, like after breakfast, after lunch, and after dinner. So they were very much committed and very much disciplined. And one thing, when I was there, I took a note there, I was like, the only the only two things I see as a sign of civilization in the middle of all these mountains in the forest. I was in eastern Afghanistan, which is very mountainous, and with this
Mm.
Taliban group, and it's very mountainous valley. So the only two signs of civilization I could see there were the radio and the Kalashnikov. Apart from those two things, there was no other sign of civilization. It was like you're living in 5000 BCs.
Wow.
So
What do
the
you think
way,
made them so like, there's people who are very religious, but then there is the Taliban religious, right? Where they're so fanatical. Um, what do you think made them that fanatical that they are willing to kill and destroy for that?
so obviously the religion has always been used by a lot of governments, a lot of rulers all over the world to mobilize people to fight. So that's the religious aspect to it. But also during the past 4 decades, not 5 decades now, the our entire generation was being radicalized by the by everything, by the environment, by the school, by media, by literature. Everything is sort of uh, like was set there to produce people like the Taliban. For instance, can you believe I went to school and do you know how I learned math? I learned math like 2 bullets plus 2 bullets equals 4 bullets. That's how I learned math.
Wow.
So and when the when and how I learned alphabets, like the Pashto alphabet that I went to school, like in Pashto we have like ABC, we have Alef, Bet. So Alef for Allah, and P for Topak, which means gun, and J for jihad, and like that's how I learned alphabets, and
Wow.
that's how I learned mathematics. And do you know where those books were published, who printed and supported? They were
Who?
they were printed in Nebraska. They're funded by
Really?
the United States.
Okay,
And,
let's talk about that.
yeah,
Why
so
would the United States be doing that?
because they wanted, so during the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan, the Americans started helping the Afghan refugees, who were refugees who went to Pakistan, right? And there were millions of them. My family was among them too. So everybody who grew up in the refugee camps in Pakistan, and it's not me, it's my whole generation of people, millions of people who grew up there, who went to school there. They learned math and alphabets and rest of schooling. They did through bullets and guns and jihad. That's how we were taught. And apart from that, there were 40,000 madrasas. 40,000 madrasas. I told you I went to a madrasa too. I, I survived. I survived not turning out to be a Taliban, but like everybody was some sort of like the whole ecosystem was made that the end product of the society should be people, crazy, fanatic people like the Taliban. We were because what the Americans and the Europeans and everybody who was supporting the Mujahideen in the 80s, what they wanted these refugee camps in Pakistan to be the breeding ground for more jihadists
Why?
because they needed those people to fight in Afghanistan against the Soviets. So the
Okay.
Soviet, yeah, the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan. So it ended in late 80s. Uh, during that time, a lot of Afghans they had to leave Afghanistan and go to Pakistan. When they were based in Pakistan, just like what happened with the Taliban, these Mujahideen they were coming from Pakistan, attacking the government forces. Back then, the government was a socialist government supported by the Soviets. But the Americans were on the opposite side, and they wanted to avenge the Vietnam War in Afghanistan. So for that reason, they had to radicalize a whole generation of people. And the Taliban are the end product of that. So the Taliban didn't just pop up. They were like the whole ecosystem was created to produce people like Taliban. So there were some lucky people like me who escaped the matrix, but
How did
and
you
the,
escape the matrix? Like, what were you specifically able to do that, do you think?
I credit there's this Pashto poet. I credit him for all this because when I was going to school, I was in grade like 5, 6. From a very early age, I got exposed to his poetry. So I would carry his poetry book in my school bag, and I would read his poetry all the time. So, and in his poetry, his name is Ghani Khan, and he encourages like a lot questioning everything. So I started questioning everything, and I started like questioning religion. I started questioning God, jihad, and then I studied, and the more I studied, the more I found things out, and the more and then at one point I just got to the conclusion that well, this is like not going to work for me. So, it wasn't like I went to sleep one day and then woke up in the morning and decided that I'm a different person. It was a process. It took a couple of years for me to get out of that matrix at first, because when you're taught something as a kid, when you go to kindergarten and then you go to school and you go to your mosque, you go to madrasa, you go to like
That's your
everything you
whole
do,
world.
that's your whole world, your whole values, your whole concept of being, right? And then like you find out it's all lies. And so it's gonna take a while to to get over those feelings, right? Uh,
Hmm.
but 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 there are a lot of people. It's not only me. There are a lot of people, like especially people from my generation, who went to religious school, but they turn out to be like me. A lot of them, but there are a lot of them who turn out like the Taliban. So that's the
Right.
reason. That's the reason they're doing what they're doing, because they, and I know them. I understand the Taliban way better than a lot of other people because I used to think like them when I was a
Hmm.
kid, like going to school, like when you're extreme religious person, how do you think? You think like a Taliban. The only difference between like the those kind of Muslim and the Taliban are that the Taliban have guns. That's the only
Do you
difference.
think it's a sincere belief in, kind of the exact text that you're reading, or is that something else that's being projected into it? Again, because you have people who are not radicals who follow Islam, and then you have people who are absolute radicals and they're reading the same text but have fundamentally different ways in how to approach it. Is it because they lack, one has this strong conviction and the other maybe is more willing to question even things in their text? Or what do you think that is?
I think the problem is with the interpretation of the Quran. We have these conversations among Afghans, especially among Afghan diaspora, quite a lot these days. That the problem is that every system that you base a system entirely on a religion that's made like 1400 years ago or 2000 years ago, there will be a lot of things that will not sync with the current word order or the current world we're living in. So for Islam, the problem is, as far as what I believe, as far as Islam or any other religion, it's practiced by people in their houses, in their homes, in their mosques. It's good. The minute you take Islam or any other religion and make it a, mm, turn it to a political system, to a governance
Mm.
system, it's not going to work because the moderate Muslim, they would find one verse somewhere very with a lot of ambiguity about Islam, about education, or about peace, or about coexistence. But the extremists, they will list you like a million verses from the Quran that says otherwise. For
Hmm.
instance, there's no mention in the Quran about girls' education, and there's no uh, equality in Islam. There's none. So there are two. What the Taliban are doing is it's not according to Islam. Everybody who says that what the Taliban does is not according to Islam, they're just deluded. They're delusional. They're not. Because in Islam, couple things: the inheritance and also witness. So if you're a woman in Islam, and there's a Quranic verse for it, if you're a woman, uh, you're not equal to as a witness in a court. You are equal to half a man. So one man
Mm.
is equal to two women. And in terms of inheritance, women inherit 50% of men in Islam. And these are the things mentioned in the Quran. And
So
also in the Quran,
immediately it's unequal.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, these are so you'll see a lot of moderate Muslim and they will come up with a lot of sugar coating this. But the fact is that all these religious fanatics and the extremists, they have stronger arguments, they have stronger evidence to back what they believe in when it comes to.
Hmm.
So, for that very reason, I think what the Taliban does, it's very good Islam, and even better Islam than the Taliban are the Islamic State Islam. That's what I wholeheartedly believe in, because then in Islam there's no borders or nation states. And what the Islamic State believe in, they believe in creating a caliphate that would merge all the Islamic countries in the world, and that makes the Taliban very angry. But I have said that in the interview quite a few times before too. That the true Islamists from the Islamic State right now. Taliban are also very good Muslim, but even better Muslims are the Islamic State, the Islamic State people.
And I think what you've also touched on is that is essentially freedom of religion, but freedom from religion. So it's one thing for people to practice religion at home just for themselves, and it's something entirely different once it becomes in some way intertwined in the system. And that's where it becomes now you don't have just freedom of religion, you don't have freedom from religion, which I think is a very important distinction because somebody could be like a believe in witchcraft in their own home. Doesn't bother me as long as they don't do anything, and don't put a spell on me or something. But 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 once it becomes part of the fabric, and it's scary to me because I hear a lot of people, not to the state that the Islamist regime or the Taliban want to implement it, but there's certainly even in North America there are people who believe that religiosity should be part of the system. It should be in schools and so on, and that is even though they're not going as far as these extreme regimes, the idea of that I think is quite disturbing
Yeah,
because that's a nugget of that, right?
and now imagine like you have a whole ministry that's taking religion to people. They're chasing people with religion in their back, like
Mm-hmm.
there's a there's a whole ministry under the Taliban called the Ministry of Propagation of Virtue, which is, and do you know that ministry? The whole mandate of that ministry is they have religious police. So if you don't pray on time, they come and they lash you. And they have a whole ministry that are like as you said it, put it very interestingly, that the freedom from religion, and one is religious freedom, and there's no religious freedom whatsoever, but there's no freedom from religion either. They will take the religion. What they're literally doing is in Afghanistan, the Taliban regime, they're taking the religion and even they're putting it inside your bedroom. there are like funny videos from like these Taliban muftis, they're scholars,
Mm.
and they also tell people how should they have sex when they're in their bedrooms, like literally. And they're not like comedy uh, for, for laughing purpose. Those videos, those are like
Yeah.
serious videos that the Taliban are telling people how to have what they call jima. So they are not. They are, it's not only about praying. It's about how what do you wear, what do you eat, what do you drink, how do you speak, how do you walk, what do you consume in terms of information. Like it intervene in all aspect of people's life. So under a theocratic system, uh, like it is in Afghanistan, there's no freedom. No freedom of religion, no freedom of movement, no freedom of resting, no freedom of nothing, no freedom of talking, no freedom because they will choose for you and they will tell you exactly what you need to do to be a good person and good for
Mm.
and they don't even need for that. They don't even need uh, like votes from the people because they know the clergy, they know and they claim that we know the best because we are the representatives of the God, of Allah,
Right.
and we know exactly when He said that in the Quran what He meant. So
Mm.
listen to us. And there's no like there's
No
no space,
disagreement.
no disagreement. There's no space for a discussion or a debate or a negotiation. No, they know better, and you gotta listen to them. If you don't
Mm.
listen to them, they'll kill you, and that's what they do. So it's kind of interesting to look at how these, especially American far right, are being inspired by the Taliban. Like I find it very interesting and fascinating. Like what they think what happened in Afghanistan, it has an impact on all extremist groups, if they were racist extremists or religious extremists, but they've had a huge impact on all these uh, extremist movements all across the world, especially, for instance, the Patriots movement in the United States.
Mm.
I've watched their videos, I've watched their comments, I've watched their debates, and they sound like Taliban because
Wow.
they believe that if the Taliban could get away with what they did to Afghanistan and what they're doing there, why can't they? They can do
Mm.
the same too. And if you see what's happening right now in our neighboring, Pakistan. So Pakistan is a way bigger country in terms of population. They have more than 200 million people. So when the Taliban took control in Afghanistan, now you have the Pakistani Taliban. They're rebranding their whole thing, and they're taking territory in Pakistan because, like 5, 6 years ago, before the collapse of Afghanistan, there were barely any attacks by the Pakistani Taliban. Now there are attacks like every day, and they're becoming so powerful because they're also inspired that if the Taliban in Afghanistan could defeat the United States and return to power, we could do the same in Pakistan. And it's also inspiring people like Al Shabaab in Somalia and
Mm.
Boko Haram and these Islamist groups are all over the world. And not only Islamist group, as I mentioned, the radical far right groups in Europe and also in North America. When they look at the
Yeah, and while
Taliban,
they're fairly small and fringe, fortunately, but it doesn't mean it's always going to stay that way. And
they're
they
very
have a lot of
violent.
tools, and they have tools for now spreading. Like it's easier in some ways because of social media to spread this, and I think also in culture there's a lot of people. There is sort of a meaning crisis where people are not sure what they believe. They don't have a purpose, and I think they become very vulnerable to some of these like more infectious, dangerous ideas, more extremists, and because you even see like people who are not don't have any Arab backgrounds converting to Islam, for example. So it's like, okay, what makes it so appealing to them? They don't have a connection to it, unlike most people who are Muslims, like they that's a cultural thing. But here you don't have a cultural thing. So what's drawing people to these beliefs? And it's like, okay, they're missing something, and something comes along, has certainty and answers, and that's very easy to, I think, to cling to, and that could be Islam, but it could also be all sorts of other things. So I think that's a big part of it. Do you think that you're a journalist? What do you think is the role of journalism in areas that are conflict zones? Because there is this idea of like, okay, as you're a journalist, you're kind of an objective observer, and then there are some people who think no, a journalist has the responsibility to provoke something, so more of an activist kind of role. When you're doing your journalism from this kind of region, how do you view your own role in that?
I think it's very important to distinguish between being not biased, objective in the reporting, and then let me put it this way: we have a thing in our language which is like betarapa, besharapa, which means in certain situation, if you stay unbiased and you don't take side, you are like you lack
Mm.
honor. You're dishonorable.
Mm.
So there are certain things that you see, like for instance, what's going on in Afghanistan right now. Uh, you cannot uh, take be just reporting on Afghanistan without telling people what the Taliban are doing. For instance, let me put it this way: a lot of YouTubers and a lot of influencers right now, they go to Afghanistan and they create videos that like the national parks of Afghanistan and how
Mm.
you can travel all across Afghanistan, while they completely ignore the situation of half of the population of Afghanistan. So that kind of, if you stay by unbiased, saying that I'm just going to focus on what's happening under the Taliban because there's security under the Taliban. I can take a car and I can go all over Afghanistan. Yes, you can. That's true. Fact. But also, if you don't mention what's going on under the Taliban in Afghanistan and what's happening to the people of Afghanistan, especially to the women of Afghanistan, I think that's not objective journalism. So,
Well,
so
to
for
me,
me,
that is biased journalism because if you're not giving the full story, as opposed to, I think you can be sort of an unbiased journal. I mean, you can have your opinion. Obviously, we're going to have our opinions, but in the reporting, you do have that responsibility, I think, to show what's happening with the Taliban, because that's obviously a really relevant thing, but you can do it in a very honest way, very factually, as opposed to only showing, one portion of something. Do you know what I mean? Like it's just the way that the example that you gave where it's influencers going and showing national parks, that's them actually emitting as the story, that's not actually being truthful. That's like choosing to focus on just one side.
yeah, exactly. Like you go in there into the Taliban, for instance, in a situation like in Afghanistan right now, you go there, you talk about the and there are obviously like some good things happening under the Taliban too. Like roads are being paved in Kabul right now. Some
Mm.
streets are being fixed, right? So if you're entirely focused on reporting on that, oh look at these streets, they're nice. The Taliban are painting some walls and they're fixing some street. That could be like some people would tell would
Only that.
would tell that and also label that as being objective, being unbiased. But that's not being biased. That's being you lack the honor, you lack the ethics of a journalist to comprehensively understanding report to the world. So I'm not the kind of journalist. I don't believe and I don't think there are journalists like that exist. Everybody who says they're objective in that sense, I think they're lying. Nobody's that
Mm.
objective. Even if you are in situation like we have in Afghanistan right now, for journalists to be being unbiased against the Taliban, it's that makes them automatically a Taliban sympathizer, not a Taliban supporter. How can you be unbiased to turn a blind eye to the oppression and the repressive regime of the Taliban, what they're doing to our economy, what they're doing to our education, what they're doing to our women, what they're doing to our freedom of media, and then you act like you are being unbiased? Like it doesn't work for me. That's why I take
Mm.
really hard stance on things, because I believe when it comes to dealing with groups like the Taliban, staying unbiased is actually
A bias.
supporting them, and a
Yeah.
bias actually like empowering them. So
It's kind of like with the people who go to North Korea or something like that, and you know, there's these beautiful stores that you can shop at, and reality is you can only get off on specific stops, and you have a guide that's with you the whole time. So, and if they don't report on that part of it, the fact that they're only seeing a portion, I mean, that is a lie. I don't think there's really an opportunity, frankly, to do any good coverage from North Korea because you don't have any freedom of movement. I think, you know, same thing with people going to Russia, and, you know, glorifying certain aspects of that, and look how, you know, clean it is, or how people, there's all these grocery items in Moscow versus like there's all these towns where people are actually poor and starving. And obviously the broader context of, you know, the invasion on Ukraine, no, I completely agree with you that there is places where you just can't not have any, I guess, perspective, where, but in reality, I think the best reporting is where you just have it be very factual, and give people an extensive picture of what's actually going on in a place, not just like a little dot, but as much of a broader picture as you can, so they have the full complex reality in front of them. The reality that's complex, you know, is something like the Taliban is, you know, is pretty. If you just explain what, you know, rules they have and what restrictions they have, I mean, I think that just tells the story, and it is factual.
yeah, there are a lot of people. But I know a lot of journalists, especially like some American journalists that I know personally. Now they're in Afghanistan, and a couple of them I know, and the way they're reporting things, I really have a problem with it, because they only focus on like, okay, there's this great company that just was established in Kabul. There's this huge development project that the Taliban launched. They're just focused on those things while not factually
Mm-hmm.
reporting what's going on, what's happening to the women of Afghanistan, for instance, what's happening to those protesters, to what's happening in the Taliban jail. There are 30,000 people, political prisoners in the Taliban jail. They wouldn't talk about that. For me, right now as a journalist, if it's up to me, I would prioritize what's happening for me, the development of this. Yeah, it's news, but that's not even close to the significance of what's happening on the other spectrum, like what's happening with the to the journalists, to the activists, to the economy, to the women, to the girls. So I think we agree on that you
Yeah.
can't in certain situations, dealing with groups like the Taliban. If you stay unbiased, and I think it's kind of biased itself, and it's not
Mm-hmm.
only the Taliban. It could be like with groups like the some far right white supremacist group, or could be like I don't know, some Hindu extremist groups, or reporting on Hamas or things like that. You cannot you cannot ignore the fact that the situation, for instance, right now in Afghanistan, uh, was like this whole chaos was made because of the Taliban. And now, uh, what I find kind of interesting is that there are these some of these journalists and activists, the pro-Taliban, or I call them Taliban journalists. They would start crediting the Taliban for the lack of suicide bombings in Afghanistan. For God's sake, they were the ones doing the suicide bombings.
Wow.
There are some journalists who would say, "Oh, I can drive all the way from one city, Afghan city, to another, which was not possible before." Because it was impossible because the people who are now protecting you were the ones who wanted to kidnap you. Like those were the people like the
Such
Taliban.
cognitive dissonance there.
Yeah, yes, because they were the very people, they were the very element who made things hell for Afghans, who would carry suicide bombings, who would kidnap people, who would abduct people, and now you're crediting the same people because there's no kidnapping anymore or no suicide bombing. There are suicide bombing, but at that frequency, because the very people are now sitting at the presidential palace and all the fancy and luxurious hotel nonsense. But before I wanted to make a small comment on the far right thing in the Taliban. So I was watching this one clip from some of these far right groups, and they were saying the same thing, that if the Taliban can get away with all these rules, the ban on girls' education,
Mm.
and their misogynistic policies, they can too. And that's, I think that is sort of strengthening the anti-feminism and the extreme misogynistic sort of like mentality across the Western world,
Yeah.
especially in North America.
Yeah, I think we have a tendency to think in the West that this could never happen or things like that could never happen. But in reality, I mean, even looking at Iran, for example, Iran was a much more open society. People could go to the beach and wear bikinis. I mean, it was very different. Women were educated. There weren't all those restrictions. And then, boom, that's all gone also. In all sorts of regimes. I mean, we've seen throughout history where it's not something that's impossible. Like in Germany, Nazi Germany, right? Like Jews, and it was a cosmopolitan sort of environment for a while until it wasn't. And then you had all these restrictions on people for being Jewish or people who were gay or handicapped or whatnot. So it's like we do tend to take things for granted, and that extreme things can't happen where we are, and specifically in the West, and that's not necessarily true. It just takes the right environment. It takes allowing some of these things to percolate, and we are seeing, maybe not to the same extent, we're seeing some signs that this could lead us there. We're seeing them on the extremes of both aisles, I think. Certainly, radicalization. And that's incredibly dangerous, because I think it doesn't take a lot of people. I think this is one of the things that people don't often understand, is that it's like in most of these situations, it's not a majority of people who believe these extreme things, but the small minority that's willing to be violent, willing to be aggressive, scary. um,
Committed.
it, yeah, everybody, exactly. That's what causes it. And the fact that we don't push back in a timely way, that's where we can end up in the same places. So I think it's an important lesson for us.
It's very important to think that they don't have to be like 100,000 people or 1 million people to start with. Like if you go back to Afghanistan in 2004 or 2005, it was unthinkable for people that the Taliban would come back to Afghanistan. It was unthinkable. Uh, but then they started regrouping. Now they're back at power back in Kabul. So they were very few. This religious thing, if you go back before the Taliban, because the whole thing did not start with 9/11, it started way back in the 80s and 70s. If we go back to the 70s, so a small group of Islamists in Kabul University, they were harassed by the back then the president of Afghanistan, and what they did. So there were it was a small group, not many people. Some of them were educated in Al Azhar University in Egypt, and some of them were educated in Kabul Engineering Faculty and other schools at Kabul University. They were a very tiny group. So the government at that time, the Republic of Afghanistan, in the 70s, and the president's name was Daud Khan. So that Daud Khan arrested some of these Islamists. He also arrested some of the socialists too, communist socialists. He went after both of them, the Islamists and the socialists. So these Islamists, very few of them, they went to Pakistan. In Pakistan, the Pakistani government supported, financed, and trained them. And this was way before the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan, and way before the American invasion of Afghanistan. So they sent those people back to Afghanistan to attack government at that time. But they were very little, very few. And this idea of extremism in this sense, or what the Taliban do today, the way they blow themselves up, or the way they create this jihad. This idea was kind of unthinkable at that time. But this very small group of people in the following decades turned to tens of thousands of people who fought the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan, back then the socialist government, and then the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan, and then we had the civil war for many years, and then the very people were fighting against the American invasion of Afghanistan too. Now they're back in power. So that very few students at Kabul University, Islamist students who were very committed to their Islamic ideology. At that time, if the Afghan president could have handled them differently, we would have had a different outcome by now. But he pushed them to go to Pakistan. They went to Pakistan. They were recruited by the Pakistani ISA, and there are like tens of thousands of them, and a lot of them have died, and they're not going to. We're going to have more of them if they're not taken care of. And with the current pace, the number of religious schools we have in Afghanistan under the Taliban. So there are 400 districts in Afghanistan, and the Taliban have said that they will create at least one religious school or madrasa in each district. And the way they train people in madrasa, they're not only teaching you Islam. They're not only teaching you like how to pray or how to do like some rituals. They're playing you how to do jihad too, how to blow things up too. So imagine what's going to happen with this whole generation people,
Right.
like who are in there, like who are 10 years old, or like when I was when the American came to Afghanistan. What's going to happen when these people come to age after 10 years, after 15 years, with the mentality they are being propagated, they are being trained by, they're being
Is
brainwashed.
is there anything that gives you hope for the future?
There are the resistance that's taken place, especially from the women of Afghanistan. They're very brave, like hands down. They're really brave. I was in Kabul when the Taliban returned to Kabul. I was there on the fifth day I left Kabul. These 5 days that I was in Afghanistan, I was so scared because I knew if the Taliban take me, they're gonna kill me. Like. But these women, that I was so scared, thinking about my safety, and these women were out in the streets there and chanting in front of the Taliban to their face. So those women are like really and truly brave, and there are a lot of them. And also we have these two resistance groups that are made up mostly of the former security forces. So they're fighting the
Hmm.
Taliban. And I think with a little bit of international support, with a little bit of coordination and unity among Afghans, I think we can, Afghans, they have a chance to get rid of the Taliban. But if not, what the Taliban is doing to Afghanistan, this is going to have long-term consequences, not for the region only. It will have consequences for the entire world. Because what they're doing to Afghanistan right now, they're turning a country of 40 plus million people literally to a factory of jihadists that would just produce people who would be willing to die just at the order of their supreme leader anywhere in the world. And they have now billions of dollars in revenue. They run the whole country. They have billions of dollars worth weapons and equipment. So they're in far better position than they were in the 90s. In the 90s, the Taliban barely had Toyota pickup trucks, as I mentioned before. And their only sponsor was Osama bin Laden. And Osama had some money, but he didn't have this kind of money that the Taliban have access to right now. So imagine if they're in the country for a decade or two, what could happen?
And that's the thing. We live in a global world. What affects one country can affect others. And I do think that for other countries to be involved, generally self interest is their motivation, not necessarily some altruistic driver. Um, do you what do you think is the responsibility, or what role should foreign government plays and can play in this particular situation? What in a perfect world, what should the rest of us do?
I think it's important to not normalize the Taliban, not communicate with the Taliban, not engage with the Taliban. And there are a lot of people directly or indirectly supporting the idea of engaging with the Taliban, but I think that's a bad, bad, bad idea. Not normalizing the Taliban, not engaging with the Taliban. That's the least people can do. And if they want to do more, they should support the women of Afghanistan and they should support the resistance that's fighting against the Taliban. No, as an Afghan, I'll never advocate for any foreign troops to come and invade my country. Because we have people who are willing to fight, they just need support. There are a lot of people who are willing to fight against the Taliban. These people that are willing to fight today, if they're not supported, they might in 10 years, they might not want to fight, or there will not be people who would want to fight. Because things change and people grow and we have other generations coming in. So the people who are right now willing to fight in Afghanistan, we might not have the same people in 10 years or 15 years. So this is a great opportunity for countries that want to do something for Afghanistan. At least support the women of Afghanistan, give them like space, give them the platform, and also support the resistance groups. Everybody that's resisting against the Taliban for a democratic Afghanistan. So not to be we have to make the distinction between because they're Islamic State fighting against the Taliban too. They're even worse. So we don't want that. People who are fighting for democratic
That's right.
Afghanistan. So yeah. So I think that's the least Canada, the United States, and North American, European countries, and other regional countries could do because if they do not control Islam or these radical Islamist jihadists in Afghanistan, they will spread over to the rest of the world and to the rest of the region because in the core of their identity, the idea of jihad is embedded. And what that means is that jihad will continue until the day of judgment. So there's no end to jihad. It's not like you do jihad for 13 years and then there's no jihad.
No.
And and it's very clearly says that قاتلهم حتى لا تكون فتنة. There's a verse in the Quran which says, keep killing the infidels until there's no faith left in the world. So everything's pure until everything is purified. Keep killing people. So
Doesn't seem like a good outcome, and it sounds like there is really a short window of opportunity to even stop this at this point. It's uncertain whether there'll be another. Well, I really appreciate this conversation with you, and just want to give the listeners: is there a good place to find you at and support the work that you do?
uh, sure, like my in what sense? Like in sense that just following my things or
Just
things
following
like that.
just
Yeah,
following your
just
and
I think the great like I'd ask everybody to follow me on Twitter and see our reports that we publish and just support the Afghan voices, especially the voices of Afghan women and the Afghan resistance forces that are fighting against the Taliban for a democratic Afghanistan. Um, Thank you, Catherine.
thank you,
Lovely
and
talking to you.
you too.
Yes,
And I think this needs to go beyond the news cycle. I don't think this is something that we should be or can afford to be moving on from. So I appreciate all the work that you do, and I hope people, look into it more and support it as well. Thank you so
thank
much.
you. Thank you.